This documentary is so important to this industry and men of all ages. Every single man watching this either has children now or will one day. That's why I wanted to release this for free. The most important thing for me was getting as many men as possible to see this. Learn from this documentary and please enjoy introducing Fatherless Behaviour.
All of the women I'm friends with, all the women I know, they're like, where have the men of the world gone? Like, where are the men who take responsibility? Where are they? And my answer to them is, you killed them. That's where they are.
That's the problem. They all have a reason.
As a proud British man, I remember a time when the backbone of this great nation was crafted from strong, masculine fathers with the desire to raise good sons who could ultimately continue the tradition and take pride in being the man of the house. Today's world is a very distant version of this, with up to 50% of children in the US, for example, growing up without a father. After a quick coffee, I set off to find out why today's world has become a fatherless generation.
I'm Aisha Aslam. I'm the founder and director of Sakoon Counselling Services. I'm a systemic therapist, a clinical supervisor, and I specialise in working with families, couples, and individuals. I think the increase in divorce rates, there's many factors that contributes towards that. One example is there's less support from wider families, which then means there's more pressure for couples in the different roles that they have to fulfill. And this then gets multiplied by the rise of economic factors. So what you tend to notice is that both partners need to work in order to make ends meet. There's lower pay, there's higher costs in living, and this causes stress. It causes strain in relationships where they don't have time for one another. And this can also lead to divorce taking place. But there's also, we're living in a postmodern era as well, so there's less emphasis on religion and traditional values, so we don't really think about marriage in the sense of we have to work hard at it. It's important to sort of work on your marriage and really put in that commitment, but we now have this sort of notion on individualism, this idea of it's my freedom of choice, I can choose to do whatever I want to, and as a result of having that sort of perspective, it means that we have less pressure to have to stay married and that it is more accessible to divorce.
I think America's got, or maybe the West has their head so far up their ass. They're like, we don't want to look at these other cultures. Like, we know the way, trust us, it's working out. It's all working out, guys, as we're marching with like single parent households, men and women hate each other. It's just getting worse and worse. And we're just like, it's all going to work out in the end. But society progresses through zigs and zags. And I think the intentions are pure. Like, I think, people should have more freedom. I think we should have some of these old ideas modified or thrown out. But I think when you just do everything, it causes issues. And that's why I think we're seeing these problems between men and women. We're seeing divorce rates. We're seeing both parties are not satisfied with the dating market. Women have just as much complaints about men. And I never want to put it on Western women. I know some Passport Bro content creators are like, these women, these OF girls, like, I'm telling you, the guys have just as bad of a mindset. I'm out here, my girlfriend's over there. When we go out into the club, when we go outside, the respect for our relationship among other men is really high because they're not coming from a scarcity mindset, and they still respect the fellow men as fellow brothers. Like, they're like, this man obviously likes this girl. He's trying to treat her right. You know what I mean? They're out together. I'm not going to try to go in there and start hitting on his girl when he's away or like give her eyes from across the bar. Like, that's some Western shit because it's so man, we threw away all the rule. Like, and people are hungry. Like, it's a scarcity. I got to get as much as I can type mentality. Even when I post my girl on social media, the DM she gets from Western men is insane. Let me fly you out here. Let me take you here. And it's wild. Everyone's behaving as if they're starving. You know what I mean? When in other cultures, it's a lot like, no, I'm calm. There's a pretty girl with a guy. I wish him the best. If anything, the guy might be like, damn, that girl's really pretty. Let's help that guy out as a brother, as a fellow brother. Let's like make him like look kind of cool. It's kind of like the thanks for letting me borrow your Ferrari type comments. You've seen those in social media. Yeah. That's more the mentality among men. So it's just as much men versus men are just as much of the problem as women as far as the Western dating culture and why marriage and all that's happening. In my opinion, I'm not a sociologist, but I've seen a lot of the world, and that's my experience.
My name is Susan Schwartz. I'm an analyst of Jungian psychology and have been doing this, some form of therapy, for my whole adult life. And I came onto the idea, not the idea, but the realization that there's an effect if you don't have a father. I would say Western culture, culturally, a daughter's not supposed to rebel against the father. She's supposed to be, as you said earlier, daddy's girl. And that is not good for any culture. It is very difficult for many people who are from the East, whatever that means, East, to really deal with the Western culture. I would say the United States. One woman actually just a bit ago said people in the United States are very direct. It's not part of my culture. We are not direct like that. And I myself tend to be very direct.
I was making travel vlog content. I already sort of followed the tenets of a passport bro before I even knew what it was. And then I just started seeing comments on my stuff like passport bros up, passport bros out here. And I'm sort of like, what is this movement? So I'm definitely like, I like to explain it like I'm not the wave. I'm just like a surfer who was out in the ocean when a wave came and sort of got picked up with it. But it's men who are open to dating globally, like joining a global dating marketplace instead of just being trapped in whatever country, whatever location they're in. And a lot of guys, almost every guy who goes from the West, who goes to experience it, has a positive outlook and a positive response and enjoys dating outside of the West more than their home country. Everyone's got their own reason. And that's what's great about joining a global marketplace is like you could really find the culture, the people, the lifestyle that fits with you more. And there's a lot of factors. Almost everything's playing into your factor. A lot of these guys have remote jobs where the US has one of the strongest dollars. So not only does their lifestyle change dramatically, where they can eat out every meal, order in healthy food, get the best gym membership, get personal trainers, all of that stuff you carry with you into your dating life too. So now they're bringing all that in. The women they're meeting have these sort of cultures. Like the dating scene is very much a bunch of unwritten rules. You know what I mean? And we've developed those rules hundreds of years. And I think America sort of, in the sake of progress, just threw out everything. We were like, we're done with this. It's all, get it out of here. And now we're left with, okay, what are the rules? Is every date 50-50? Some girls are like, actually, I don't want it to be 50-50. Some girls are like, it needs to be 50-50. Some guys are like, I want this. Some girls want that. So now we're all just trying to figure this new thing out because we threw everything away. So I think guys like structure. I think let me know if I bring girls flowers on the first date and open the door for her, she's going to receive it a certain way in her culture. And it's not going to be like, is he perpetrating the patriarchy? And, if you have a girl over, if she cleans your house and cooks you something, she's not going to feel like, oh, this internalized patriarchy. Like, what am I upholding instead of this, like, this is what men like being done for them. This is what women like being done for them. And it's a sign of respect, not a sign of some crazy giant dominance thing that's overarching all of our ideas. I think it's just, I could keep going, but there's a lot of reasons why, what makes it great. But I think those are like the major reasons is the lifestyle change, finances are absolutely better, networking, and having actual dating structure and culture that's been proven and sort of you understand how to behave.
So Western cultures have much more of an individualistic perspective. So this idea of focusing on independence, focusing on this idea of freedom of choice, doing what I want to do. So it's really very much focused on the self, and whatever the self you want to do, that gets fulfilled. In Eastern cultures, however, it's very much a collective perspective. And what they do is when they make decisions, they don't focus on themselves. They have to think a little bit more about the wider community, their families. So whatever decision they make, they need to think about what impact that would have on other people. So that gives you a little bit of a difference in terms of how people make decisions in life. But when we think a little bit about the shift in society as well, when we look at social policy changes, in 1969, the Divorce Act stated that people can only divorce if there was one person at fault. So, for example, if someone had an affair or had an abuse, was being abused, then that would validate the reasons to actually get divorced. But then in 1971, they actually stated that there doesn't have to be anyone that's their fault. So it made it more accessible to divorce. And what you notice at 1971 is that the rates just increased. You noticed a huge increase in divorce.
And I'm the kind of lawyer, you know, there's a scalpel and there's a chainsaw. I'm the chainsaw. Well, I'm a divorce lawyer. I've been a divorce lawyer for about 25 years. My practice is based primarily in New York City and the surrounding area, and I represent men, women. I occasionally represent children and when I'm appointed by the court, but 100% of my practice is divorce, custody, child support, and family law related issues. In answering the question or thinking about why people divorce, you really have to make a distinction between why people say they're getting divorced and why they're actually getting divorced. And you know, mental illness is the illness that tells you don't have an illness. So crazy people who know they're crazy aren't as dangerous as crazy people who are certain they're not crazy. So I have a lot of people that come in and they'll say, here's the reason why I'm getting divorced. But when you dig a little deeper into the facts of the case, you figure out, yeah, no, that was a symptom of the underlying problem. So he's sleeping with his secretary. Right, he's sleeping with his secretary. You hadn't slept with him in 7 years. I mean, people have always been saying adultery. The reason we're getting divorced is because this one committed adultery, that one committed adultery. And I get that because adultery's been around for a long time. And I always tell people that if you ever doubt that it's been around for a long time, whether or not you're religious, we're all familiar with the 10 commandments and theoretically that God gave us 10 rules as human beings. It's funny that you know, thou shalt not kill was one, but don't cheat got 2. Don't kill, honor the Sabbath, don't sleep with other people. Seriously, don't sleep with other people. So that to me tells me that this is a problem that's been around for a while.
And if we just think a little bit more deeper in this area, when we grow up, are we ever taught about marriage and what is part of marriage and what are the skills that are required, what's involved in marriage? I know I didn't when I grew up. And this tends to be an aspect in life we don't get taught. We get taught how to be educated, how to have a career, but we don't get taught these life skills. And as a result of that, when couples get together, they have this sort of Hollywood or Bollywood view of marriage, that you live happily ever after and it's all about love. But marriage is actually really hard work. You've got to work on it. It's about putting in that effort. And people, when they have an argument, they don't have the life skills of knowing how to resolve an issue. And people don't have patience. So it's almost like we have this instant gratification. We want to have a quick fix and we don't want to work hard. We don't want to work on sort of working through these issues. There is research in, I don't know if it's Switzerland or Sweden, but they've actually shared that partners now don't have a clear role of whose roles and responsibility there is. It's very much diluted. So not saying that men go to work and women stay at home. It's this idea of both partners tend to work, but there is no clear established role of who does what and who looks after the children, or how do we manage all these multiple roles that we need to fulfill. And this as a result creates a lot of strain in marriages.
The children, so on the one hand, the children who are brought up in this type of dual parent family with this type of involved father, those children are doing better than I've ever seen children do in any generation previously. And however, the dad deprived children, or children that grow up with two parents that think that their child is everything in the world and require nothing of the child but just give them trophies for trying but not for necessarily accomplishing or succeeding. Those children tend to be much more isolated, lonely, depressed, turning to drugs and addictions. And they are and we have those children in much larger numbers because in the US, UK, and in many countries, there's a huge amount of children that don't have father involvement as a result of divorce, and a huge amount of children, like 42% in the United States of children who are born to mothers who are raising them by themselves, or some small percentage raising them while they're living with a man, but live in relationships in which there is a child born only last an average of 3 to 3.5 years, and the children lose their dads usually to a large degree after that, and those children are suffering in much larger numbers than we've ever seen in the world before.
So when we think about white British children and they're being outperformed by other communities, and there could possibly be one factor related to the lack of two-parent families. So there is research that shows that family structure does play a role in children's academic performance, but it's not the sole determining factor. So when we think about lack of two-parent, the single parent may have more challenges, they have to have extra workload, which then means they may not have as much time available for their child. And that could have an impact on their performance, but there are still a lot of single parents who do value their child's education and do put that as a priority. So I do feel that it is a very generalized perspective, and we need to sort of consider the sort of wider social, broader context. So research has also shown how socio-economical factors takes a role in the sort of educational performance. So for example, people with low income or who don't have extra finance to provide for tutoring or extracurricular activities, this can also have an impact on a child's educational performance.
The dad-deprived boys are very often delaying transition to becoming adults. Boys are 66% of the people living in their families' basements, much more likely to move back in with their family after they've completed high school or college or so on, and they're much more likely to drop out of college. They're much more likely to be unemployed for a longer period of time. They're much more likely to be addicted and not really get their act together, addicted to drugs, addicted to opioids, addicted to video games, addicted to sexuality, to porn. And these boys just, they don't feel good about themselves. They often feel depressed, particularly those addicted to video games don't sometimes even see themselves as being a real human being.
Also cultural factors as well. So what you notice in ethnic communities is that they put a very high priority and value on education. Not saying that white British families don't do that, but I think there is a very strong emphasis within the ethnic communities that they will create a really supportive environment for their children. They will create routines, they will create rituals in order to provide a sort of a learning environment for their child. They will get extra resources in place. They will also be very heavily involved in their child. So parents will be involved in their children's homework. They will do whatever they can in order to support them with their education. So I think there's also something around the expectations, the values that people hold towards their child's education that also plays a role on the child's performance.
When I started to do the research for the Boy Crisis book, I submitted to my publisher 10 areas of concern that were creating the boy crisis, but I ended up finding that the most important area by far was what I call dad deprivation. The boy crisis basically resides where dads do not reside. This was sort of really major information for me. As I started to control for the socioeconomic variables, I found that the boy crisis that leads to the lack of fathers that leads to the boy crisis has an impact on everything from IQ to the child's likelihood to succeed in every single academic subject, especially in reading and writing, which are the two biggest predictors of academic success or failure. The boys are far less likely to have postponed gratification, which means that they don't, because dads tend to bring to the equation of the family boundary enforcement and saying, if you don't do this, you won't get that. And then they stay with that. And therefore the boy learns to do what he needs to do in order to get what he'd like to have. And when the boy doesn't have that postponed gratification, He doesn't, he's not able to fulfill his dreams. If he's a good basketball player or a singer or an artist or an actor or a writer, he doesn't have the discipline to complete the project or to do the practice that leads to him being outstanding. So he becomes disappointed in himself because every time he pursues a dream, he fails. The dad-deprived boy is often deprived of the ability to succeed in more than 70 different areas and far more likely to commit suicide, far more likely to be addicted to drugs, to video games, to porn.
You know, getting married is less risky than having a child with someone. I have to explain that to a lot of high net worth clients. I have to explain it to a lot of professional athletes in particular. Because, you know, people seem to have this mistaken belief, men in particular have this mistaken belief that, well, if I don't marry a woman, my finances aren't at risk. Or if I marry a woman, but I have a prenup, my finances won't be at risk because I know what my upside and downside is because we've governed it by the prenup. You have a child with someone, that's not the case. Ultimately, the decision to have a child with someone is not only a gigantic decision from an interpersonal place, from tying yourself to this person for really the rest of your life. You're going to have grandchildren with this person, and this person's going to have tremendous leverage and power over you for the rest of your life, because most of us love our children as much, if not more, than we love ourselves. You know, my grandmother used to say, when you have a child, your heart is walking around. And when I had kids, I experienced that for the first time. So when your heart is walking around, that is your greatest vulnerability. And if you have a child with someone, the two people who have the most authority and power in a child's life, of course, are the two parents. And the primary custodial parent, which in the overwhelming majority of cases ends up being the mother, has tremendous power. You know, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So there's not only a personal power piece of this, but there's a gigantic economic component to it, because many of the custody cases that we have are actually just proxy wars over child support and child support related expenses. Sometimes I represent men who say, look, I want to get custody at least 50% of the time, because the expense of paying for full-time childcare would be lower than what paying child support will be and child support related expenses. So I'd rather just have my child half the time, have a nanny full-time, and have that person help raise the child. And I'd rather pay that nanny and be able to fire and replace them rather than having to pay a massive amount of child support to my ex-wife, who there's really no way to know if they'll use it for the benefit of my child or if they'll use it to take themselves on vacations and get lip fillers.
Most people, not everyone, but most replicated the same answer, which was, he wasn't there. So this is what people say, oh, he was of that generation. Really? What does that mean? Because that generation had a generation before, and that one had one before. And the problem has been that really fathers were never expected or hoped to have emotional relationships with their children.
I represent a lot of women. And I look at some of the men they're married to and the way these men behave. And it's very hard for me not to say to those men, like, how do you call yourself a man? Like, how do you behave this way? You're supposed to be better than this. Like, you're supposed to be, yeah, she's histrionic. Okay, you're supposed to not be histrionic. You're supposed to be logical, tactical, disciplined. Like, this is something you should be proud of being, you know, and yet, you know, they're like, oh, I can be just as base and I can be just as vicious. And again, I get it, because I think when you tell people over and over and over again, you're a villain, you're a villain, you're a villain, they start to go, all right, you want to see a villain? I'll show you a villain. And I have seen men, irresponsible, in my opinion, men, who set up families like franchises. You know, they get a woman, have a couple kids with her, bore of her or bore of the situation, and they leave. And then they get another woman, usually younger, prettier, and they have a couple of kids with her. You know, and a man who leaves his wife for his mistress just creates a job opening, that's all. So sometimes guys do this 2-3 times, right? Because now the mistress is the wife. Well, now he needs another mistress. So now he's got it. Then he gets rid of that one, gets another mistress. And, you know, so it's like, They set up franchises and they walk away. And those are thankfully the minority. But that's reprehensible behavior. I mean, the damage that does to our world and to children, boys and girls, is stunning. And it impacts boys differently than it impacts girls. It impacts them long-term differently, but it has nothing but negative impact on both. Thankfully, that's the minority. But in some ways, the majority reason is much more terrifying to me. And that is because I'm like Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn said, if only there were good and bad people, and all we had to do was separate the categories. But the line of good and evil runs through the human heart. And in reality, what most of the time when I see men walk away from their children and create what we would aptly call fatherless children are men who have been driven to that either by the alienation and negative gatekeeping of the mother which has created a rift that is really they are powerless to fix as a man, and that the system is ill-equipped to fix because there is no judicial solution to that problem. You can, if someone doesn't pay a bill, you can sue them, get a judgment against them, put them in jail if they don't pay a judgment. How do you force someone to talk about your co-parent with love and respect? It takes a special kind of crazy person to say to a child, your father's a bad man and you shouldn't love him. But it's really easy to do this. Hello? Here, it's your dad.
The impact that I think female promiscuity has on failed relationships and the lack of fathers in the home is connected to the sort of postmodern era that we're living in. We have this idea of marriage is no longer seen as for life, that you don't need to work hard at it no matter what, but we're sort of living in an era where it's based on confluent love. So what I mean by that is love depends on a partner benefiting from that relationship, and when they're not benefiting from that relationship, that they can just leave, and that's what tends to happen. So not this idea of working hard or exploring it a bit further, and they don't feel the need to have to stay out of duty as well. And divorce then ends up becoming quite common because it's based on their sort of needs being met, and if that's not being met, then they tend to leave.
I see a lot of men who get to a place where they go, what am I doing? Yeah, I love this kid. I want to see this kid. But every time I see this kid is being tortured when they get back. Childhood's a temporary state. And I think there are a lot of men who understandably and tragically are going, yeah, I am not this is a tug of war. And the harder I tug, the harder she tugs and the system tugs. And then the harder I have to tug. The only way to win that game is drop the rope.
I'm thinking, as you said, about promiscuity. The people that I know, the women I work with, whose fathers were absent, and that's actually true of every single one. Throughout my entire career, well, probably there's been some that were present, but very few. And their issue was not being promiscuous. Their issue is their real sense of self and the honor to themselves and the ability to really respect who they are and go for the most that they could get. You see, because the issue is when something is absent, like a father, one feels lacking inside. So rather than projecting it out and say, oh, you weren't there. You see, most people won't do that. They won't go, you know what? You weren't there. How can we repair this? And that's what the issue really is. How can we repair it? So there's like a give up, and one becomes flawed inside. So I've written actually quite a few books beyond the absent father, and each one is a slice of what happens to the daughter when she doesn't have a father. She'll be acting too young. She will not gain her own, as I said, sense of self. She will lack the backbone, confidence to really go for what she wants.
Not only is it a common thing, right, that you say like a girl has daddy issues and she's more promiscuous. Like I think having that masculine love in your life is really important for men and women. You know what I mean? I think, and as divorce skyrockets, as single parent household skyrockets, that's just gonna exacerbate. It comes with a bunch of problems. So I'm not sure exactly all the ripple effects of that. I haven't sat on that or thought about that too long, but absolutely, like all the studies, one of the major ways to ensure, my mom's a child psychologist, to ensure your child's success is like stable home life, stable family life. Like that should be the pillar and key of society. Should be like, we need to maintain these are really important. And like I said, in name of liberation and freedom, we're sort of like, any rules put in place to help that situation thrive. It's like these rules are from the patriarchy, or these rules are outdated. You know what I mean? It's like, it's crazy how much wisdom we've thrown out. But it's like, say a romantic man. It used to be like our grandparents, a man picked one girl and he sort of put all his eggs in one basket. And then social media and messaging, because when my grandparents were around, if you were a dude who was asking every girl to the dance, word spread fast, and those dudes weren't respected. But now you can send out 10,000 DMs and no one talks to each other. No one knows you're a dog chasing that. And as a romantic man, that one girl you have a crush on, she now has 80,000 DMs from all the dogs, because it takes just like 6 dogs in your city to overwhelm the inboxes of everyone. And so it's like, as a romantic man who wants to play by traditional rules, it doesn't work. Like, it's just you're entering a culture where that isn't your best bet. Your best bet is to mass approach. So it's a cycle. Everyone's hunting with shotguns instead of sniper rifles, and a lot of people are just getting hit. And girls thinking that because they get hit with a bunch of bullets, they're top of the line. You know what I mean? So it's a crazy cycle. And I agree. I'm glad you put it that way. That it's like a traditional minded man, he's set up to fail almost.
Because males do not really get encouraged to express their feelings. They're already, behind the 8 ball a bit, and they already can't do it. So do they want to walk away? A lot of them are quite sad. But oftentimes the father, because he doesn't know what to do with his feelings, pushes her away. And the daughter doesn't know. I mean, he calls her terrible names. Terrible names. Comments on her clothes, her mind. You're too smart. You're too this. You're too that. And she only feels put down. But the issue is, he doesn't know how to say, you're actually becoming really lovely. I totally appreciate you. That's all he needs to do. So these are the kinds of situations that then happen. And then the daughter feels totally rejected. She thinks her body is awful. And at that point, she might go into being more promiscuous.
We're starting to pay a lot of attention to who files for divorce, because there is a dramatic difference. It's over 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Now, I think it's unfair. That statistic's been thrown around a lot because it's used to say, well, oh, you see, women are like getting married and then they're cashing out once they're married and have a kid with somebody. They're cashing out and getting what they can get from the divorce. And that's certainly not always true. It is certainly true sometimes. I say that as someone who's represented those women and represented men who are married to those women. But I will also say there are times where who initiates the divorce is more a function of who needs judicial intervention, who needs to get a judge assigned. If a guy goes out for milk and never comes back and stops paying the mortgage and moves in with the former nanny, and a woman has to file a divorce so she can get child support and pay the mortgage on the home and pay for food for the kids that he's abandoned, she filed for divorce. But is the divorce her fault? That's kind of hard to say. I don't know that abandoning marriage is the concept. Like, I don't know that that's the way to go. I've taken a lot of heat for saying that I think marriage is like the lottery, that you're probably not going to win. But if you win, what you win is so good that it's okay to buy the ticket, just get a prenup. Now, I've been criticized for that because people say I'm saying that the odds of a successful marriage are as bad as the lottery, which is not what I'm saying. Or that I'm saying that, because the lottery, you have no control over whether you win. Whereas with a marriage, you have some control over whether you win. I think it's absolutely foolish and ignorant to say you have total control over making sure that your marriage is success or failed. Like, I think that that's absolutely preposterous. As another autonomous human being with agency, there's absolutely no way you can be solely responsible for the success or failure of your marriage. You might be single-handedly responsible for the failure of your marriage. That is possible. But to single-handedly be the success of your marriage, I don't buy that for a minute. Successful marriages are because both people are putting something into that, and usually because both people are taking something out of it. But I'm seeing already in 25 years of practice, some real trends. I mean, I'm doing a lot more prenups than I used to, and that's not a function of just my practice. My colleagues and I are constantly comparing notes that the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, they're getting prenups.
A lot of times when people have had the divorce and the father has left, their relationships last about as long as the time of, so maybe they were 12, maybe they were 5. Their relationships last about that long. And they don't, it's amazing. And they don't figure, wait a second, what separation happened here that hurt my inside self that I am repeating in order to be able to repair it, not just to leave. So if you just leave, how much are you going to grow?
However, it is important to note that the future of masculinity is not solely determined by the presence or absence of fathers in children's lives. So there is this sort of shift in discourse in what masculinity looks like, and it's becoming a lot more diverse. So traditionally, the role of masculinity was seen where men have to be strong and dominant, but now men are more embracing the idea of being nurturing, being kind, being compassionate, being more empathic, being in touch with their emotions, so more of them sort of feminine traits. And that's starting to be more embraced in masculinity, rather than that sort of pressure that you can't cry and that you have to be strong and need to sort of be there for everybody else and not show your sort of vulnerability. Although there is a rise of children growing up without fathers, there is an increase in awareness of active fathers and how they get more involved with their children. So being more nurturing, being more kind, sort of spending more time with their children, rather than this sort of traditional view of you have to be dominant and you have to be strong. So there is this recognition of the positive impact that fathers have on their children's development. So although the statistics is quite scary, on the flip side, there's a lot of research to show how much positive impact fathers have and how their roles are changing in masculinity from being very dominant and strong to being more empathic and being more nurturing. But I do feel the future of masculinity will be shaped and changed due to the social and cultural changes. But I think the ultimate goal should be creating a society that values and celebrates individuals' views of how they want to be when it comes to masculinity.
And I think when men are honest with themselves, when they really look inward, do some sort of self-work, they realize that that's not the way. And just to be honest. And I feel like some men have created, I think in society right now, we're arguing not in search of the truth. There's those Greek argument, to win an argument, to prove a point, or in search of the truth. And so many people's personal brands don't because we're all listening to these influencers who have personal brands, and sometimes a new revelation could be directly against what they've built and their audience wants to hear. And so many people are too afraid to take that step in pursuit of the truth, to be like, you know what? Maybe it's not right to just try to smash top G, maybe it's not right to be, and nothing against Andrew Tate, actually. I'm just saying it's that sort of mindset.
Well, I think, sadly, that a lot of people stay together for function, not love. I think love is a very difficult issue. And I'm going to add something on here, which is that one of the issues also is the father who's too self-centered and narcissistic, and therefore does not know how to love the daughter. But I would also think that really staying for love is something that people learn how to do. And they learn really to accept each other. And it's based on knowing yourself deeply inside, honoring yourself, and really struggling through and not giving up. Struggling through because there's feeling there, because it's worth it. I really wonder what would happen if people have lack of commitment. So I'm going to be with this one for this period of time, that one for that period of time. And you know what's going to happen? You just repeat the same story. I think that our culture does not promote depth or understanding or really going for the quality of life. It's too superficial. So I think if we can deepen ourselves, we can have meaningful relationships. I know too many people that stay together because why? Money? Money. Too expensive to get divorced. Really? You're going to stay together for money? To me, it cheapens the world. And you'll know it's love if that person will accept you and you will accept them. And that's the issue with an absent father. You don't know about acceptance enough. Or maybe you get too angry at yourself, or you take on the flaws and they don't belong to you, or the aggression against yourself, anorexic, too fat, too many augmentations, too many facelifts, these kinds of things that are external to try to repair the pain inside.
I had a young man contact me. He said, I was about to commit a mass shooting. And I somehow or other, I got a hold of your boy crisis book, and I read it, and I realized, my God, this is me, and this is me without a father. This is me with a mother who's constantly looking after me and solving all my problems for me. This is me living in my mother's basement. This is me playing video games to such a degree that I didn't even begin to feel like I was a human being. I felt I was a character in the video games, or that my only friends were the people who played video games with me. And I didn't have a comfort going out of my mother's basement to be in the real world with real people. And he said, I knew all of this on some level, but I was so angry at my mother, who was the one that was taking care of me and giving me everything. I was so angry at her because I was in this position. And so I was ready to do a mass shooting to express that anger and to have some recognition that I was present in the world. And so he said, fortunately, I read The Boy Crisis, and it really made me feel not so alone, not so isolated, realizing this is happening to a lot of boys. And it really prevented me from doing the mass shooting. And so I want to thank you. And so I spent many times, he and I and another psychologist friend spent a number of sessions talking with him to make sure that he didn't just drift back into his old ways again.
I had a young man who worked for me recently in his early 20s. And I was talking to him, and we were eating lunch in the conference room. And I didn't really know much about him personally. So it was like a leisure moment. So I said, oh, so what's your deal? You have a girlfriend? What do you do? And he said, no, I had a girlfriend once, but it was like, and then he just kind of went on eating. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, that's a very different thing. It was almost like, oh, do you like Indian food? Yeah, I had it once. It wasn't really for me. And it's like, wait, this is not Indian food. This is like the primary biological imperative. Yeah. This is the reason we built cities, the reason why almost everything a man does can be traced back in some way to his desire to get laid. I understand why this younger generation of men are feeling so defeated and are feeling so useless and are feeling so vilified. How could they not? But I don't know that the remedy is walking away. I want to believe it's not. I want to believe that we can recapture all of the wonderful things that make a man, all of the best things of manhood. I mean, I feel like it's a privilege to be a man. I'm very happy to be a man. You know, I like what comes with being a man. I like the hard work of it. I like being someone who's defined by how I can protect and provide. Like, I'm proud of that. It has tremendous value to me. You know, I don't want to be a recipient. I want to be the one to create and to give. So I think we have to start reminding young men that that's not only the core of who they are, but it can be their defining characteristic. And we have to inspire them again, as opposed to vilifying. You know, I really believe that the sum total of wisdom I've ever had to offer to any of my sons is the hard thing to do and the right thing to do are almost always the same thing.
So this brings us full circle. I'm in Barcelona to fulfill my dad's final wishes. He asked me to put his ashes in the sea where he lived for 8 years. It's funny, because he left us at 14, and I should hate him. But in truth, when I look back, I only remember the good parts. Walking away from that sea, I couldn't help but think, maybe it's my time now.